All right, well, thanks, Jill. Thanks for letting me be in your classroom again today. That was a really, just a phenomenal lesson that you did with your kids in math today with the equivalent fractions. First of all, when I came in and I asked the kids, I asked 3 different groups what they were learning today, and all 3 groups were able to say we're studying equivalent fractions, and they were able to describe exactly what they were supposed to be doing, so they knew quite clearly what the objective of the lesson was today. How did you communicate that with them?
We had already done some preliminary work with the whiteboard, and we've been talking a lot about equivalent fractions. This was our first actual real lesson. We've been talking about it, and they've kind of started to pick up some of those ideas, like 5/10 is a half because half of 10 is 5, and that sort of thing. So, delving in further with those harder fractions like 4s and 3rds and even 8s, and obviously even more so than that.
Yeah, no kidding. Excellent. Well, and the engagement was just fantastic. Why do you think this lesson was so engaging?
Because we were using manipulatives.
Okay.
They are very excited about fractions. It's very difficult for some of them, but because they could actually see it, it was very concrete. It was right there. And especially in 3rd grade, as you know, that jump from 2nd to 3rd grade is just so difficult. And we introduced so many things. So the fraction strips are just a lifesaver because they can see it and they can talk about it. And they're like, oh yeah, it's like proving that they're right or proving what the answer is.
Okay. Why are they so excited about it?
Because I'm excited about it.
Well, and so how do you share that with them? So
when we start fractions, because I know it can be an uphill battle sometimes,
yeah.
I just say this is one of my favorite things to teach. And I said, you're going to love fractions, and we've got my fraction flowers up there, and they've even used those as resources. Eli was like, well, Miss Wistrick, that fraction flower there says that that's why. And so they're really picking up on that. We try to use as much as we possibly can. We had a song, we sing and dance sometimes, and all that good stuff.
Well, I thought that the way that the lesson ended with, well, first of all, I just wanted to mention that they were very efficient with the manipulatives. Mm-hmm. You've obviously spent some time teaching the procedures for that, and you had 30-second transition that went very, very smoothly. So kudos to you for taking time to teach that procedure. And then also, in the debriefing at the end, when you brought all the kids back together to talk about that 9th problem. So if I recall the problem correctly, it was 2/3 is equal to blank 9ths. Mm-hmm. And they had the fraction strips for the 3rds, but they didn't have the fraction strips for the 9ths, mm-hmm. right?
Right. They had 8s and 10s.
Okay. All right. And did you knew that kind of going into the lesson, and so you were...
Yeah.
How did you plan for that?
I didn't. I wanted to kind of see what would happen.
Okay.
And so I knew that was on there. There's that one, and there's another one at the very end. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to see, oh, well, what are we going to do now? If they were going to freak out, which some of them were like, oh, we don't have 9s. I'm like, well, just skip it and come back to it, because I wanted it more to be of a challenge. Or some of them, as you saw, went in and just tackled it and tried to figure it out right away.
Yeah. Yeah, so. It was really fantastic. I thought it made for a really rigorous problem for kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was kind of a DK2, at least a DK2 level, I thought, for the kids. They did it. So you had 3 different kids, 3 different groups come up with 3 different solutions for that. Yeah. And I thought that what you did with Javi at the end, when he had trouble articulating how he solved that, and you didn't let him off the hook.
I didn't.
So, and especially for Javi, who's so advanced, for him to struggle with something like that.
It's like his brain just goes there, and he doesn't know how to always explain that.
Yeah, yeah. But you kind of helped him out. You had to help him out a little bit.
Yeah, I did.
Tell me a little bit more about that and what that was like.
I obviously, I don't let the kids off the hook. I stick with them, but I just thought it was important to push him. And and like I said to him, I said, I know you can take this, so I'm going to pick on you a little bit. And he kind of smiled. He's like, yeah. Mm-hmm. But I think it just shows to him that there's still a ton of learning he can do. And I think it's going to make him look closer, because he is a great helper or partner with trying to explain things. I think it's just going to push him along even further, and it's going to help him better understand, okay, it's this part and then this part. Because he sees the whole picture like that, but those pieces are what he because his mind just goes there. Right. So I think it's going to help him break it down.
Yeah. Very cool. And then is it Kylie?
Haley.
Haley, I get her in the child and stuff. Haley, I don't think she's ever going to have trouble with fractions again in her life. I mean, she made such a powerful connection.
She did. I will tell you, I don't know if you heard this or not, but we had talked about that.
Yeah.
I had said to her, how can we, she's like, well, I think it's this. And I was like, well, why do you think it's this? So we talked about it. I said, well, how can we make sure that this answer's correct? And that's what I explained to her. Remember that we can, because we've talked about that before, how you can take the numerator and the denominator, what number times 3 gives you 9, and then you can also take that top number times 3. So for her, because she struggles so much with math, it was still enlightening, because she could repeat back what I told her, and she could do it.
What a success for her.
So that was a huge success for her, and she was so excited to share. She was just like, like, pick me, I have another way, pick me.
Right.
So.
Oh, that was fantastic. Well, I thought the whole lesson was just fantastic, and I'm really excited about the rigor that was in the lesson, not just in how you planned it, but that you had, that the task was rigorous in terms of the nights, that you had the student collaboration going on, and then in your questioning, you were constantly asking kids, why, tell me why, explain this, how you figured this out to me, whether it was in the smaller groups, on the floor, or back in the debriefing afterwards. How do we make sure that as you go forward with your fractions, that there's more of that going on?
I have some fraction cards that we have not used. We've used for other purposes, but it's basically, tomorrow we're going to be working with fractions on the number line, and kind of, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. Fractions on a number line, and as far as 3/4 is the same thing as 6/8. So kind of drawing it out, they know where things are on the number line, but how those equivalent fractions really line up with those benchmark fractions.
Okay.
So moving that forward, we've done a ton of work with number lines. So furthering that, but even past that, I think I have some cards, and there's some of them are harder, 6/8, 3/5, that sort of thing, and putting them in order from least to greatest. And we kind of did a preliminary round just to kind of see, I wanted to see who could and couldn't do it, and so this is something we're going to be working on. And I put them in groups of 4, and I was like, nope, this one, and I would pull, so if they were out of order, I would pull the one that was out of order. And so they had, okay, well, if this is this, so really starting to compare and figure out, oh, that is the same as this, that's smaller than a half, so more of that comparison I think is going to be really beneficial.
That'll be interesting to watch to see how they do that. Will they use the manipulatives for that?
At first, yes.
At first, yeah, sure. Well, that's a smart move on your part to use the manipulatives. That's really cool. That'll be interesting. I'll be interested to see how that goes. So what did you, backing up just a little bit, I should have talked about this first. What did you learn from your kiddos in today? I mean, who did this really well and who kind of struggled with it?
I think they all did it really well, and thankfully who I had them paired with, if they did struggle a little bit, that other partner could help them out and explain to them, and my kids know them, like, you can't just say, okay, this is the answer, like Yolanda came in late. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it's okay, come on, we'll join the group. And she was or not Yolanda, excuse me, Kaylee. Right. And she went, they gave her the answers, said, oh, back up. You can't just write down the answers, show her what you mean by that. Okay. And so Kimberly's like, oh, yeah. And Yolanda's like, well, this one's this. I mean, they were having rich conversations. None of them were off task except for Sebastian, who was singing a little bit.
Yeah, and he was already done, I'm sure.
Yeah, he was.
So you were pretty strategic then in who you put together.
I did.
And with that, as you always are. Okay, good. So how will you find, so they've done this in partners, then what, you move to some independent practice with this piece?
Yeah,
as well?
Yeah, we will. And we'll have those manipulatives. Caden and Sebastian did not start off with manipulatives at first. Okay. And until they got to some of the harder ones, and they're like, oh, we need those. And so, which was fine. And I encouraged them to use them because I wanted everyone to see the exact same thing. And how 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4, and how they're both the same length, they mean the same thing. So.
Good. Okay, so we've got independent practice coming up for that. That'll give you a chance to see where kids are really at without the partner work. And then you're going to extend the rigor with this by working with the number line and having kids put different sets of fractions in order and figuring that out, and be able to use manipulatives with that. That'll be very interesting to watch. Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm excited.
When will you be doing that work with them?
Today's Wednesday. Next week.
Next week?
Yeah.
Okay. What day do you think?
Probably Tuesday.
Okay. Can we schedule our time for that?
Yeah.
Okay. What time on Tuesday?
Back to regular schedule.
Yes.
So when 20?
Perfect. I'll get you in. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.
All right.